Do you want to go to a meeting with me? You know what really struck me are the last two words, with me. We're doing this together. And that's part of the message of a good, loving family intervention. Let's do this together. It's not you versus us or anything like that. We're all in this together. Let's do it together.
Just because a person has pain and trauma doesn't mean that they're going to become addicted to whatever substance it is that they use. Not all people that have trauma become addicted, but all people who have an addiction likely have trauma that is going to have to be addressed as a part of the recovery plan.
Families don't realize how much power they have, and for a very good reason, because they've tried to talk to their beloved alcoholic or addict. They've tried this and that, but they haven't really tried an organized intervention method. What we're trying to do is raise the bottom to right now and to give them a clear path into recovery. And it's really very effective. But you're right, we're always starting over with every family.
Welcome to the Why Intervention Podcast. I am your host, Christopher Doyle, today joined by Jeff J. Jeff is a clinical interventionist and addiction specialist. He's been guiding families into recovery for more than 30 years now. Jeff is the co-author with Deborah J. of the best-selling book, Love First, A Family's Guide to Intervention, now in its third edition. And his recovery memoir from Hazelden is Navigating Grace, a solo voyage of survival and redemption. You can find Jeff at lovefirst.net. He's one of the first people that I went to a training with when I became interested in the intervention process, and I'm really excited to have him here. It seems like it's a poetic thing that this is my 100th episode of the Why Intervention Podcast, and so it feels real good to have Jeff come on to do this one. So hi, Jeff. How are you?
Oh, I'm just great, and thanks so much for having me today.
Thank you for doing this. It's great to have you, and of course, I want to tap into your knowledge and expertise, all of the wisdom that you have after all of these years, but I'd love to start with your, let's take it to San Francisco, 1981. Let's say you're 24 to 72 hours away from the intervention that would save your life.
Okay. Yeah. My addiction really took me down very hard, very young. I had looked good in high school. I was a National Merit Scholar. I was president of my high school student association. But by the time I was 26 years old, I was sleeping under bushes in the city parks out in California. I was basically homeless, penniless. I had a bleeding ulcer, bleeding colon, transient neuropathy of the legs. I was shot. But I still didn't think that I had an alcohol or drug problem. I just thought I had a little cash flow problem. If I could bum some money off of you, everything would be just fine. So, I was already into one day at a time. I just didn't know it. In any case, I heard through the grapevine that a friend of mine had committed suicide. And I was at such a depraved spot at that time that I thought, that is a good idea. That is just exactly the right thing for me. And I didn't say that to anyone. I determined that I would do it. By a series of little miracles, my parents found out where I was. I mean, the last time I talked to them, I think, was when I was in Chicago just a few weeks before. I was always hitchhiking around the country or taking a train or bus or something. I was just like Jack Kerouac on the road. And anyway, like I say, through a series of very unlikely events, they found out where the flop house was that I was living in. And this is 1981. There are no cell phones.
Yeah.
They found the number of the payphone in the basement and somebody knocked, you got a phone call. This is like at 8 o'clock in the morning, right? I'm like, I hadn't killed myself, obviously. And they, I go down to the basement of this flop house. There's a payphone with a receiver hanging down. I answer, hello? That's my father. Oh, I can't talk to you. I'll call you back. And I hung up. And I went and I got a little bottle and at Coit Liquor and went kitty corner the other way to Washington Square Park and just sat down in the grass. And I couldn't even commit suicide right. I was so depressed. I'm like, how did they find me? How did they find me like when I'm just about to kill myself? I haven't told anybody about this. It's like, it was so depressing. I couldn't stand it. And I won't get into too long a story here, but I just decided, okay, I've got to follow through on this. I just started to cry like a fool in the park. And I'm like, okay, you're pathetic. You just gotta go do the deed. But I realized I need to call back home, get them off my back, and went to some payphones in the corner of the park and called back home. And my mother answered the phone, and she was like really nice. And they'd been talking to some doctor who knew something about intervention. So calm, very loving, put my dad on, and he was very calm. And believe me, my father and I were not having very many calm conversations in that era of my life. So anyway, he asked me a question, and there isn't anything magical about this question, but it stopped me in my tracks. He said, "Jeff, how are you doing?" Like, how am I doing? Well, I just couldn't even speak, but my brain was spinning. It's like, how am I doing? How am I doing? Well, I'm bleeding from both ends. I can barely walk, and I'm going to kill myself in about 10 minutes. But at the same time, the sun is shining, the birds are singing, there's St. Peter and Paul Cathedral right there on the north side of the park. And I don't know what happened, but I said the single most intelligent thing I have ever said in my life, before or since. I said, I think I need to go into a hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And next thing I knew, there was a plane ticket back to Michigan. There was enough money that I could drink on the plane home. And they got me up to the first detox available the next morning. So that's the short version.
Yeah, that's the beginning of the sobriety journey that's lasted now for over 40 years for you.
Correct. Yes, I know. I was one of the young guys once
Uh-huh.
upon a time. Now I'm one of the old guys. I was just trying to put a couple of weeks together, and now I'm.
And when you were in treatment, you probably weren't even, kind of bought in hook, line, and sinker walking in there, right? Like, so when you say that you were just trying to put a couple of weeks together.
I didn't know anything about anything. I'll never forget, I was in detox and the head doctor came in to walk. And I was having a tough detox. I'm wearing the funky little pajamas that tie up in the back so your butt's hanging out, and I'm sitting on the side of the bed. I'm shaking, I'm sweating, I'm having a terrible time. And the head doctor comes in to talk to me. And he's like James Earl Jones in his prime, this great, big, powerful black man. He's been doing alcohol and drug treatment for like 30 years. White coat, stethoscope, clipboard, comes, he gets right up in my face and he goes, "Boy." And I'm like, "Jeez." He said, "Boy, you got a disease." He said, "You're not responsible for what you've done." Great. He said, "But you're responsible for what you do now." And I'm like, shit. He said, "Your disease is incurable. The most we're going to be able to do is put it in remission. We're going to give you a program to follow, 12 steps. You follow that program and the disease will stay in remission. You stop following that program and the disease will kick you in the ass again." And he stood up and he walked out. I didn't know what he was talking about. I didn't know anything about disease, remission, AA, 12 steps, nothing. But I remember that little homily like I heard it yesterday, because it was the perfect little nugget of information. And as time went on, as the days and weeks went on, it made more and more sense to me as I got to go to my first AA meeting and, et cetera, et cetera. So that was Dr. William Keating, and he was a lifesaver for me.
Wow. So one of the things that's, impactful for me in hearing the initial story is that I think that for many families, they may, kind of minimize the importance of their role as catalyst in getting someone to enter the detox, enter the hospital, go to the first meeting, walk through the counselor's door, go into the rehab. That without the family, that doesn't happen. You're not just leaving the park on your own that day. And so it seems like a subtle thing, but that contrary action that your parents took, just in their tone, in their way of communication, and your father asking how you were doing, was like a critical moment.
It's so true. And families don't realize how much power they have. And for a very good reason, because they've tried to talk to their beloved alcoholic or addict. They've tried this and that, but they haven't really tried an organized intervention method. Now, in
Right.
my case, it obviously wasn't a really organized intervention method, but I was also on the verge of ending my life. So I may be a little bit more susceptible than most people. What families learn when they get into a more organized intervention process is that there's a lot of power when you bring the family and friends together and train them and rehearse them very carefully. And it's so necessary, like you said, because, well, you can even see in my own case, the neurological damage that's been done by the continuous use of alcohol and other drugs makes the addicted brain almost completely incapable of seeing any other way of living.
Right.
And the addicted brain sees everybody and everything as a threat if it isn't directly supporting the addiction. So, without some kind of intervention, whether it's a medical intervention or a legal intervention, or if you're lucky, a love first family intervention, without something like that, they're not likely to get help. And of course, we don't want to wait until there's a legal or medical catastrophe. We really want to do it now. So that's why I'm such a big believer in intervention. I mean, intervention saved my life.
Right. And of course, when you hear the myth of, that people with addictions have to hit bottom, oftentimes, what I say to families is how many bottoms have you seen come and go without them
Hmm.
stopping, right?
Right.
It's not like the thing that looks like this should definitely be the cause of them making the phone call to get themselves help. Those things come and go. There needs to be an outside intervention of kinds, but not just the medical consequence or not just the legal consequence or not just not just the consequence, whatever it's going to be. There also needs to be an opportunity for recovery offered in real time, right? Close to the whatever just happened in their life.
That's absolutely right. And let's face it, it's not just about getting the person into treatment. Getting the person into treatment is insufficient. We know that a lot of people who go to treatment then come out and relapse. So what we want to do is create a family recovery team where we're going to not just get them into treatment, but then the family is going to move on to what we call structured family recovery. So everybody starts working a recovery program. The family in Al-Anon, the beloved alcoholic in AA, or, if it's NA, whatever it is. The point is, we want to get some momentum within the family where everybody's kind of getting launched into recovery. This has a very powerful effect in bringing the addicted person along so that they're not the only one trying to paddle the canoe. We're all going to get in the canoe together and we're going to work together on this thing. And
Yeah.
so that's another reason why intervention and structured family recovery is so important.
Yeah. So we want to get help, not you need to get help.
Right. We all need help. And we're going to walk this journey with you. We're going to really do it. We're not just, trying to put you into a program.
And
We all need to get
oftentimes,
well.
yeah, and oftentimes the family can take steps even if their loved one is not necessarily agreeing to go into a treatment program or to get themselves help at this point. Just the fact that the family members are beginning to make shifts and changes, it can't help but to have, a positive influence on their addicted loved one.
In their structured family recovery process, they can make changes in the way they've been supporting that person. They can continue the conversation with them and so on and so forth, because sometimes it's just a control trip. They're probably going to go, but they've got to be the boss. And so what's all important is that the beloved alcoholic sees that their family members have started to make that shift and they're going with their own recovery and they're starting to say no when they're being asked for support and so forth. This support, like, give me $20 is what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So it's very powerful. And in my experience, most of those people who have resisted the intervention on intervention day will go into treatment very soon.
Can you speak to, I think that the way that you just described it, it's like most of them do go, of course. So statistically speaking, and just in your professional experience at this point, how often do people end up going into treatment the day of? And even if it's not the day of, but how successful is the intervention process for anybody that has some skepticism around it?
Yeah, if it's done right, it is very, very successful. If they're in a straightforward case, 85 to 90% of the people we're intervening on are going to go to treatment that day. And the remaining 10 or 15% who say no on intervention day will likely go within, a few days or a week or a couple of weeks, something like that. Now, those percentages can be decreased if there are really serious mental health problems or some other extenuating circumstances. There are, any number of them. But even then, as long as the team has gone through a very thorough preparation process and not cut any corners, and they really know what they're going to do and how they're going to do it, they've rehearsed and trained and everything, then they're very likely to be successful.
So what is the preparation process then, if we would like to abbreviate it just for anybody, if this is their first introduction?
Right. Well, if you're working with a professional interventionist, like I'm just going to talk about our private practice.
Yeah.
So we have 3 modules. Module 1 typically happens on Zoom because we work with families all over, and we get everybody on the line. We talk through the person's case in great detail, probably for an hour and a half or so, take a little break, then start a training process, how to write your intervention letters, bottom line letters. What are their objections going to be? How are we going to answer them? How are we going to strategize out the intervention? Then some days would pass, we'd get treatment set up, 10,000 details, et cetera, et cetera. Then we would have module 2. That's a full rehearsal of the intervention, read through and edit the letters, complete the training process, run through different scenarios that might take place. Like, what do we do if he walks out? She walks out. And then module 3 is the actual intervention itself, and then we escort the person from there to whatever treatment center has been selected. Or a lot of people are just, maybe they don't have the resources to work with a clinical interventionist, and so they're just going to read Love First. They're just going to read the book and follow the directions. It might take them a little bit longer, but the book, Love First, is written in such a way that they can really do it on their own. In fact, on our website, free to anybody, is our intervention workshop too, which is a series of 3.5 hours of podcasts. It'll walk you through the process as well. So, and I'm not even trying to like sell a book or something, like, you don't have to go out and buy Love First. You can go to your local library and get it for free.
Right.
I mean, it's like,
yeah.
Just
and
the point is to have some directions to follow.
Yes. Yes.
That's the whole key. I mean, if you're going to make apple strudel for the first time, don't make it up off the top of your head, right? And maybe get out a cookbook.
What do you, in your experience, so you're sober in 1981, and you've worked with some of the, biggest names in addiction treatment and recovery, right, along the way. And you've written a number of books that have been instrumental. You created an entire intervention process, or modified intervention to, with the Love First model, and then to have structured family recovery as an add-on to that. And you've grown and grown. Where do you think that we're at? Now, here we are, 2025, and you'll still hear people, just flat out, like, there's nothing you can do to help them. You can't help them until they want it, until they're ready, until they hit bottom. You just can't do anything about it. Like, they have to want it. They can't do it for their family. They can't do it for their husband, their wife, their kids until they want it, right? And those are some of the memes that you'll see, that go on social media and just get the most amount of likes and everything. And where it's like, yeah, that's it. That's the truth. For me, nothing changed until I wanted it. But from the family perspective, it's like that version of events leaves out the critical instrumental pieces of the puzzle that was oftentimes the family member, again, being the catalyst in those stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, AA doesn't even get going without Lois Wilson. Okay, it's not, she's the one who really helps Bill to understand that even though he's not getting anybody sober, like when they're still in New York, it's like, yeah, Bill, but you're staying sober. Oh, yeah. And then with Dr. Bob, who would co-found AA with him, does Dr. Bob agree to speak with Bill Wilson? No. He says, no, but then he, okay, 15 minutes, or whatever, he's not. AA number 3, does he ask for help? Is he doing it for himself? He gets put in the hospital by whom? His wife, and Bill and Bob go to talk to him. and it doesn't take. So they come back the next day. But again, he wasn't looking for the help. So there's this whole mythology. Now, and why does it persist?
Right.
Because there's a certain amount of truth to it. Because but the truth is misunderstood. Here's the secret. At some point, the person does have to get to this point of acceptance or surrender, whatever you want to. And surrender is not such a popular term these days, but acceptance. What's the acceptance of? I've got a problem and I can't fix it, and I need help. But here's the thing, that often doesn't happen until they've been in treatment for about a week.
Right.
And the bottom, this classical bottom that people talk about, is really only visible in the rear view mirror. You know, people bounce along the bottom, as you've kind of alluded to, for a long time. And then they'll finally say, well, you know, I lost my job, I lost my wife, and, you know, whatever, and I got sober. Hit bottom. Well, they've been around the bottom. Here's the thing. With intervention, what we're trying to do is raise the bottom to right now. We're trying to use the love and concern among the family members and friends to raise the bottom to now and to give them a clear path into recovery. And it's really very effective. But you're right, we're always starting over with every family. Though, like you say, it's 2025 at the time that we're doing this. And every family that I talk to, we're always starting from zero. There are still so many myths and misconceptions, and there may be more now too than ever. I mean, we're having a whole kind of what we had in the 80s where, you know, well, it's not really addiction, it's just a secondary to a psychological issue. We've been through that before, by the way.
Yeah.
And again, there's some truth in that for some people. But once you become a full-blown addict or alcoholic, it doesn't matter so much what the ideology of it is and where it all started, because you've got to deal with that addiction and get the person stabilized and get their brain stabilized so that you can do some work on the underlying issues.
Right. So there is like a lack of focus on it being a primary issue.
Yeah.
And, you know, I literally read this 5 minutes before our interview. Someone wrote me a question, and they were basically saying, I've heard, though, that people's pain and trauma causes addiction.
Yeah.
And I said, well, it's not that it causes the addiction. It's that addiction is the result of the solution that person is using to maybe deal with their pain and their trauma. However, just because a person has pain and trauma doesn't mean that they're going to become addicted to whatever substance it is that they use. So essentially, right, like people, like addiction, not all people that have trauma become addicted, but all people who have an addiction likely have trauma that is going to have to be addressed as a part of the recovery plan.
Well, on Earth, where we live, everybody's got trauma. Everybody's got some adverse childhood experiences. Everybody's got stuff. You're correct. It's not causal. It's not like a billiard, you know, I've got trauma, therefore I'm going to become an addict. It may be, for some people, it's right up front and you've really got to deal with it, you know, I mean, and it's got to be done. It's a matter of triage. Where does it belong in the treatment process? For some people, it needs to be dealt with right away. For some people, it does not. And regardless, job one is to keep the person clean and sober, because if they're not clean and sober, they are not going to benefit by the help anyway. They're not going to be available for the help. And if you open, you know, if somebody's got some trauma issues, you've got to decide, you know, is now the right time to open those up?
Right.
Or will opening those up right now make them more vulnerable to relapse? Do they need to get a little bit more ego strength? Do they need to get a little bit more foundation under their feet? You know, these are clinical decisions that can only be made in treatment, and it's not a one-size-fits-all. So I think that there are a lot of oversimplifications that are out there in the world these days that are unhelpful. And the other truth is that, and this has been true forever, people would an old line that it probably is not politically correct, but people would rather be crazy than alcoholic. They'd rather be crazy than an addict. I'm not an addict. I just, if you've been through what I've been through, and I've got depression, and I've got ADHD, and I've got this, and I've got that, and I'm bipolar, and there may be truth there, there may not, but so many people just want to hold on to that drug no matter what. Because let's remember, if I'm as an alcoholic, it's a complete solution for me. It may be destroying my life in every way, but you know what? It works right now. And so it is my solution. So let's not take that away. I'll work on depression. I'll work on anxiety. I'll work on trauma. I'll do all these things on an outpatient basis so I can go to therapy, come home, and drink. How much better is that situation going to get? Is it going to get better at all? No. And what's the blame game going to be? Well, you don't understand me. You don't understand. I'm working on my trauma, and they say it's okay that I drink, and there are so many things that are gumming up the work these days as we become more sophisticated in how we diagnose these things. So,
yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that today a doctor would do or say the similar things that you heard your doctor say in 1981.
Right. Which is why treatment is not as effective as it was in the old days, because we used to give people a very clear path. Now we give them many paths, and we let them kind of decide what they want to do. And that sounds good. It sounds like you're giving the person agency and respecting their independence and stuff like that, until you take a look at their brain, until you take a look at the SPECT images of the brain and saying, is this the brain that we should be entrusting these decisions to? Is there anything that's gone on in the last 2 or 3 years that shows that this brain is really the right one to be making a decision? I mean, I would be more likely to just take whatever sounds the easiest.
Of course.
I mean, hello. So, we think that there are a lot of well-meaning people who don't necessarily understand the hold it has over the brain.
Right. Yeah, I mean, brain scans, just let's say for alcoholics, and with the Dr. Amen and the Amen clinics and what they've found, right, doing the brain scans and showing alcoholism the brain looks almost worse than an Alzheimer's patient in some cases.
Yeah,
right?
it can. Yeah.
So now imagine you're about to help someone with Alzheimer's and they're 2 days away from their latest worst episode, and you say, well, what would you like to do for your Alzheimer's?
I know. It's absolutely crazy. So I think, I wouldn't want to go necessarily back to treatment in 1981 because I think it had its deficits too. There's a lot to be gained by some of the sophistication that we have today, but there's also danger. And I think that we have to be very careful in how we treat the individual and give them the clearest path, the optimum path that's going to work for most people, and really encourage them to make a commitment to a long-term program of recovery, just a day at a time. And I know that's a cliche, but like any difficult thing, how do you earn a PhD? One day at a time. How do you raise a family? One day at a time. There isn't any other way to do it. If you try to, map out the whole thing, let's figure out all the ups and downs of family life for the next 20 years before we begin this process, there wouldn't be any human race. Everybody like, oh.
Yeah. And, I'm thinking about the other thing that the doctor said, where, you're not responsible for anything that happened. And so even again, now here we are, 2025, and I feel like we're still very much in a place, and this is not, I'm not even saying like that, 2025, this is just ordinary emotional relationship sort of stuff that where if you're dealing with an addicted loved one, you're going to be hurt. You're going to be, taken advantage of. You're going to be manipulated. You're going to be lied to. You're going to have all of these various things happen. And there's no doubt that's going to have its effect. How do we get a family member to separate their loved one from the addiction for the purpose of recognizing that the addiction is something that can be dealt with versus your loved one, making your loved one responsible for all of the things and holding them accountable for, uh, what they were powerless over at the time. That's not going to help you get what you want as a family member.
That's right. And what the doctor said to me about, you're not responsible for what you've done, but you're responsible for what you do now. Very important the way he said that, because alcoholics and addicts will really destroy themselves with guilt and shame and, and what they've done and everything. So let it go. Let's be forward looking. Let's work on our recovery. It's not a get out of jail free card. You're still responsible for making the amends that you need to make and,
Mhm.
dealing with what you can deal with. But first, let's do, the next right thing. First of all, let's stay in treatment. Let's complete treatment. Let's follow the aftercare plan. Let's go to AA. Let's get a sponsor. Let's work the steps. Let's, a day at a time, one little step at a time, get better. And ultimately, all these things will work out if I can stay sober and keep following the directions rather than doing whatever Jeff's crazy brain, as long as Jeff keeps following the directions, he's got a good chance of making it. If he starts following what he thinks he should do, uh-uh. This brain has not shown itself to be very, prescient when it comes to dealing with addiction.
Right, right. And so I think an important addendum then to what I was saying is like the idea of you heard that in treatment, right? What I'm saying is if the person is still in active addiction and they don't
Yeah.
have any exposure, they haven't received any kind of help, and you've been trying as a family member to all of the various different things that you've tried, right? That you found have not worked.
Hmm.
And anything that kind of puts a personal responsibility on the individual with the addiction automatically creates a defensive dynamic. It just
Yes.
creates and you're not going to get anywhere with them until you can separate them from the addiction and put all of the focus on, we understand that what you're struggling with here is an addiction and that the addiction is the cause of all of these other problems. And so we would like to help you with doing something about your addiction.
That's right. It's the necessary first step that's going to help to make the person available to work through the rest of their issues, which takes time.
Another issue with family members that has come up that I feel, kind of heartbroken by is when I see families get to a place where they're just apathetic. They've arrived at this place where they just don't care because they've just been through it for so long. And so it's not to say legitimately that they don't care. Of course they do. They still love this person, but they're
Hmm.
exhausted. They are
Oh,
exhausted and they've been through the
yes.
ringer and they just can't do it anymore. So, I guess it's a two-part question is one, how do you help those family members? But really, two,
Hmm.
it's like, how do we get through to those families before they arrive at that place? Because that could be the end. That could be,
Yeah.
they're finished.
We see this a lot. I often say the first intervention is always on the family because within the family, there's typically one person who's kind of taking the lead. And they're like, we've got to do something. And
Right.
then you've got all the rest of the family members and friends, and they have a whole range of viewpoints and emotions going all the way from, yeah, we've got to do something to help Jeff to, no, I'm going to kill him, you
Mhm.
know, and
Right.
everything in between. And what I find works best is, earlier I was talking about our modular system of doing interventions. If we can get them to just learn more about how we might be able to help the beloved addict and get them into that meeting where everybody's going to talk through the case and then they're going to learn a lot about the intervention process and everything else. So we're spending 3 or 4 hours together, the whole evening. Typically, by the end of that evening, everybody's gotten this vision that, yes, there is a way to do this. There is a reason why what we have done hasn't worked. There is something that we can do that's positive, and that gets people into motion. They kind of need to have that group experience. And of course, it's helpful if they are being led by an interventionist. But even if they're not, they can at least maybe agree to read the book and follow the expert in the book. They kind of need a leader in that
Yeah.
way.
Right.
You know, I think I don't have a good answer for your second question of how we can help families not get to that place. Most families do find themselves in that place where there's this great disparity of opinion about what can be done, what should be done, and all that. They're all over the place. And that's just the norm.
Hmm. Yeah. I find just for my own, like, I have a podcast that is dedicated to talking about intervention and, addiction and recovery. And just because it's something that I feel passionate about, like when I first discovered it. And I just thought, this more families need to know that this is available. And much like your story, my story is similar in the fact that I just came home on a Sunday morning and had my head hanging low. And my mother, who was in recovery, happened to notice that look. And rather than, doing all the things that a mom could do, she just said, "Would you like to go to a meeting with me?" And I said, "Okay." In that moment, if my mom doesn't ask the question, I don't go to the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
If my mom doesn't know that there's a place to go, she doesn't ask the question, right? So there's a lot of like subtle things there, but if it doesn't happen, I'm not sober today. And even though I had my ups and downs, I have 18 years sober now. That
Wow.
initial instance lasted for 3.5 years before I, struggled again and had a relapse. But so that catalyst point, that moment, it's kind of like, how do we get families, aside from just sharing this story and then like hopefully people hear it, it's like it should be something that families become more aware of, that like the ubiquitous response to identifying that our loved one has an addiction is we need to
Yes.
now look into intervening.
Right. And I think it's all about learning more. And I want to go back to something that you said, actually, that your mother said, do you want to go to a meeting with me? You know what really struck me are the last two words,
Right.
with me. We're doing this together. Let's do this together. And that's part of the message of a good, loving family intervention. Let's do this together. It's not you versus us or anything like that. We're all in this together. Let's do it together. And all we can do is keep, holding up the light for families that, yes, there is something you can do. And we can only hope that someone stumbles on a good podcast like yours where they can get some, good guidance on what a solution looks like, or find the right website or book or what have you. I mean, unfortunately, there are a lot of people out there who aren't going to be that helpful, but we'll set that one aside. But geez, there's so much hope, really, if people will just take some time to, and just like our hopefully newly recovering alcoholic, just take it a step at a time. You're
Right.
not going to solve, the whole addiction problem in one afternoon. There isn't a magic bullet. But if you're persistent and take the time, you're very likely to succeed.
And so what was it for you that drew you to intervention?
Well, I had been working as a counselor and therapist in the addiction treatment field for a number of years. I started at a place called Sacred Heart Rehabilitation Center in Detroit. And then I had moved to Florida, and I was working at Hazelden at a program that at that time was called Hanley Hazelden, which is where I met my brilliant and beautiful wife, Deborah. And we always say we were therapists, we weren't patients, when we met in treatment. And we wanted to do something more. And at that time, back in the misty ages of time, intervention was just about unknown. There was certainly no intervention TV show or something like that. Vern Johnson had written some books, but they were not. They didn't really manualize the process. They didn't really tell you how to do it. You read, I'll Quit Tomorrow or Intervention. It was still kind of amorphous. But we decided that, there really is something there. And if it was developed more, it could be very powerful. So with some fits and starts and, this and that, we initially did a program with Betty Ford and Hazelden called Take Charge. And then ultimately our book, Love First, came out in 2000. And that really changed. That was a game changer. for the intervention field because it was such a step-by-step guide to how you do this. So anyway, that's a little overview of how it happened.
Yeah. And what was the motivation for you? So you have your clinical experience, you're working with people, and then it's like intervention. There is something here that needs to be more
We were,
widespread.
I think that we wanted to be able to do more. We felt that more families could be helped. We felt that this was a tool that was undeveloped and poorly understood, and it was a lifesaver for families and their beloved alcoholics and addicts. And it was just laying there, and it was, in its kind of nascent form. It really hadn't been put together. And so we were like, this has got to happen. And we just decided that we would make it happen.
Yeah.
We didn't know enough to know what we didn't know. And we just kind of went wild and put everything we had into it. And, it worked out.
Yeah. So the 25 years hence, after the book comes out, what's the experience been like?
Well, it's very gratifying to be able to help so many families. It became our life's work and continues to be our life's work. And Deborah has gone on to develop structured family recovery. And really, her name should be first on Love First. It says by Jeff J. and Deborah J. It should really say by Deborah J. and Jeff J. Because we got some very good advice early on before we ever wrote the first edition by a newspaper editor friend of ours who said, memorably, if you want your marriage to survive the writing of this book, we're like, oh, if you want your marriage to survive the writing of this book, decide before you begin who is going to be the final writer. Oh, that was very good advice. And Deborah was the final writer. And that's why the book is as good as it is. And we stuck with that through the 3 editions. So we collaborate on all the ideas and everything else, but Deborah's always the final writer,
Okay, got it. Yeah.
And that way, just from a technical writer point of view, that way you always preserve the same voice
Right.
and so forth. There are very good reasons for that advice.
Yes. But so all of the ideas that kind of came along and what your business turned into, what the services that you, like how you expanded and how it's grown over these 25 years, like the actual, like growth points, what's happened along the way?
It's just been an organic process where we're always wanting to learn more and research more and refine things more and realize what other things could be helpful to families and just keep putting them out there. So it hasn't followed a good business plan. It's just kind of happened organically. And we're very passionate about the work, and it has just, I don't know how else to say it. It's just grown organically over time. And so, for example, people wanted training, and most trainings are just terrible. Most clinical trainings are boring and stupid and awful and everything. And so we decided, if we're going to get into the training business, we're going to really, raise the bar. And it's going to be 5 days, and it's going to be grueling, and it's going to, you've been there, no. Yeah. It's not like, your typical weekend training at the Holiday Inn, right? You really get put through the ringer. So,
yeah, I would take your version of grueling for 5 days than the grueling 90 minutes of PowerPoint presentation of somebody,
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. So I think we've just been guided by our own passion. By our whole thing has been always to try to the best of our ability to raise the bar and to refine things and make them better, make them more effective, and so forth.
Yes. So Love First is the starting point, and then Structured Family Recovery, just if anybody's not clear. I have it here. We have It Takes a Family.
Right, exactly.
And I got my tabs. Yeah. I got my tabs in it here,
I love it, yes. And they actually have we have a second edition of that book too, so now they are actually, I'll show you. Start with Love First, then it goes to It Takes a Family.
Very good. Yes.
The latest editions, they were put out as companion books because they do flow from one to the other. So you have your intervention, get the person into treatment, and go right into structured family recovery. So you preserve that momentum
Right.
within the family and you're basically preserving the momentum of love and support
Yeah.
in a structured method.
And so what does the structure look like for anybody just, just in an abbreviated way, what they would
So
expect on the other side of the intervention?
yeah. So on the other side of the intervention, then you're going to be doing structured family recovery. Those are meetings that happen once a week and they happen by conference call, not by Zoom, which most people are like, why aren't we doing it on Zoom? We found that people are too kind of obsessed with, well, why is my brother looking away? What is he distracted with? People listen to each other better on a conference call than they do on Zoom. And it takes a family through the whole first year of recovery. And by the way, the beloved alcoholic can join on like week 4, week 5. And so everybody gets into recovery together. It takes them through the steps. It takes them through innumerable helpful exercises like developing a recovery plan, developing a relapse plan, things that are extremely helpful. And it just guides the family through the whole first year. And just like Love First, people can do it without hiring a structured family recovery counselor. They can just buy the book and follow the directions. It's easier if you work with an SFR counselor, a structured family recovery counselor, but it's not necessary.
Yeah. And I think that's beautiful that you've structured things in that way also. That, because oftentimes I think that people feel they may be priced out of, many of these
Sure.
services.
Yeah, right. Because these are things that aren't covered by insurance.
Right.
So I think it's important that families can do it on their own. But again, follow the directions.
Right. Is that challenge something that you've ever looked to, take on as far as this being something that is covered by insurance? I mean, don't you think that from an insurer's perspective, it would look a lot better to have recovery take hold rather than have 6 different tries in a treatment facility?
Somebody else would have to climb that mountain.
Yeah.
That's too much. The problem, and I don't want to dump on insurance, but I've seen it happen again and again with treatment that they'll initially say, okay, you can be in network, but then a few years later, they're like, well, we're just going to start, maybe not 28 days, we'll do 21 or, actually, we're just going to authorize the days as we go. So we'll give you an initial 4 days and then we'll give you 3 and then so the counselor and therapist have no idea what they have to work with
Mm.
time-wise. And it just becomes a mess. And because the insurance company becomes the payer, they've got the leverage. And again, I'm not trying to dump on but the dynamics just don't work if you've got a real program that you want to do. Now, I actually think if somebody were to underwrite it and study it for a couple of years and, put, a few hundred families through it, they would see the wisdom of it. But it's too much for us we don't have the ability to make that happen.
Is there anything that I could have or should have asked that you would have liked to have covered?
Boy, I don't know. This has been pretty thorough. The only thing I would say is that, to families out there that are worried about a loved one who's struggling with addiction or addiction and mental health issues, just learn more. You may feel like you've done everything. You probably haven't, and that's not your fault either. But there's probably more you can do. And maybe the second most important thing you can do is get an ally, get one other person in the family. So there's 2 of you or a friend who will start to learn more with you so that you've got your own kind of accountability partner and you'll be more likely to follow through and just take it one step at a time. And you're very likely to come to the point that you can do an intervention, you can get your loved one into treatment and help them get into long-term recovery.
Yeah. And I think that also having someone who you're not keeping secrets with, like at least one person that you might bring in. Also, it's like someone that can help with learning would be excellent, but then also someone who just has all the facts.
Yeah, right. Yes.
So
A
yeah,
good point. Yes,
yeah, because oftentimes it's you don't know what you don't know, and oftentimes it's like you'll say something to someone or that family member, like you said, that kind of it's like you're intervening, like one family member at a time, and then you're kind of bringing everybody along until everyone's finally going to be on the same page. But oftentimes, what gets them on the same page is that moment of realization where they just go, "What? When did that
exactly.
happen?
That's why
What?
you've
I
got to
didn't know
have that.
that."
Exactly. You got to have that first module one meeting at some point where all the potential intervention team members are going to meet in somebody's living room or on Zoom or however you're going to do it. You're going to meet and you're going to talk through the person's case in great detail. So all the facts come out on the table. And if you've got a solution in hand, like a plan for an intervention or working with an interventionist, then you can go from that problem that everybody says, oh my God, I didn't realize it was that bad. What are we going to do? Well, here's what we're going to do. We've got a plan. We're going to follow this love first method and we are going to get Susan into treatment.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, this has been great. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview. I don't know if you know the story. Obviously, I think that I've shared it with you, but you and your wife have, of course, had a massive impact on me and what I do. And you were the first, people that I discovered, basically, when I was working with the EAP for the New York City Fire Department. My initial exposure to that was doing counseling sessions, but like I kind of gravitated towards those cases where it was like this guy needs help and he's going to refuse help, or we know coming into this he's likely not going to be interested in doing anything. And so I would wind up being the guy that's talking to that individual. And, even in that scenario, it's presenting an opportunity for recovery and then also having some bit of leverage, some kind of background. I know some of the story, I know some of what's going on. And so I'm building rapport, I'm connecting, I'm hearing him out, I'm treating him with dignity, right? I'm getting everything that he feels understood, he feels seen, he feels heard. But in the back of my mind, I know where he's going and what the leverage is going to be at the other side of this if he says no. And those
Right.
pieces of the puzzle are usually like, that's it. And if the family has that, then, so it's a moment of clarity plus an opportunity for recovery times positive leverage. And that's how
Mm-hmm.
you get someone through the door marked help. And there were a couple of cases, though, where I couldn't get through to them in that one session. And I knew if I don't get through to this person in this one session, this is the last shot. This is the last opportunity. And so that's what I was like, all right, well, what am I going to, like, I was going to have to invent something. I was going to have to figure something out that much like you and Deborah came to, right? It's like, we could be doing more. I was like, I got to do more. I got to figure that out. What am I going to do? And I was just kind of walking down the street to get lunch one day in Soho, Manhattan. And instead of going to my usual lunch spot going left, I went right and I walked down a street just intuitively for no reason whatsoever, just walking along. And then there was a bookshop. And I walked in and it was a thrift shop bookstore. It wasn't like your ordinary bookstore. It was like donated books.
Yeah.
And it's not like a wide catalog of donated books, right? And so I just happened to walk up the stairs and sitting on a shelf all by itself was this book,
Oh,
No More Letting Go.
yes. By
The
Deborah.
spirituality,
Yes.
yes, the spirituality of taking action against alcoholism and drug addiction by Deborah J, your wife. And I was like, it was on the shelf by itself, Jeff. Like on one
Wow.
of those stands, it occupied the entire shelf. As I ascended the stairs and saw it, as I'm pondering the question, what are we going to do about these guys I can't get through to?
Yes.
And
Wow.
I find this book. I read it. Obviously, I just like crush it instantaneously. I just read from cover to cover,
Yeah.
and it's like this is the answer. And then shortly thereafter, I was at my first training with you. So I really appreciate the work that the both of you have put. The work and the effort that you've put into this, and the good that you've done in the world.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. And by the way, Deborah sends her best to you.
Thanks. That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Well, how do people get in touch with you? What's the best way if they want to?
I start with our website. It's lovefirst.net. And from there, you can call us or you can email us, whatever. But there's a tremendous amount of information at lovefirst.net. And that's probably the easiest way to start.
Yeah, probably the most valuable .net website you're going to find anywhere.
Well, thank you.
All right, this is great, Jeff. Thank you so much. I'll let you go, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right, thank you.